All right. Hello, White Sox fans, and welcome to another edition of the FutureSox podcast. My name is Ian Eskridge. Joining me this evening is James Fox, our managing editor. Also joining us this evening is Carlos Collazo of Baseball America. How you doing, guys?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate being on here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's just go ahead and start with what it is that you do over at Baseball America and, essentially what you have going on at the moment. I know you're super busy, so let's hear what you got going on.
Yeah, so I'm BA's lead draft writer, so basically in charge of all of our draft content over at the site, which for me includes doing our top 500 draft list each year. Final update for that coming shortly. We've got the draft coming up in 3 weeks, which seems crazy. We've got a bunch of mock drafts in the works, or that will be in the works over the next few weeks. I do some prospect stuff in the non-draft seasons, but really it's nice just to be able to focus on the draft year round, kind of like all the scouts who are covering the draft do. So that's kind of what I'm doing over at BA.
Awesome. So you just got you have the privilege of going to the MLB Scouting Combine. Do you want to let us know what what kind of takeaways you had for it, how it helps the clubs that are coming to look? I heard some people say that if they hadn't done their homework before they got there, that they're kind of already behind the eight ball as it were. But you want to tell us how you felt about what you saw out there?
Yeah, I think for the teams, actually, the most valuable part of the process is the interviews that happens. It's a chance for a lot of the heavy hitters in organizations, scouting directors, cross checkers, general managers, people are going to be making the decisions on draft day to actually meet these players, do interviews, get to know how they think, who they are as players. Teams value that makeup piece, and I think that's really the most that's probably the biggest difference maker for these players at the combine. Like you said, for most of these players, they've been scouted for a full year plus. So they kind of have the scouting report dialed in for these players. At the same time, I do think the combine is a pretty useful event for either northern high school players, more pop-up type high school players. Luke Dickerson is maybe a good example from this year's combine. He's a New Jersey area shortstop, kind of on the same Sammy Stiffer, who's Jackson Merrill, kind of that similar late spring riser, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic type. So there probably are a lot of heavy hitters who maybe haven't seen him at least a ton of times. So getting him in a workout environment can be useful. There are a lot of pitchers who are doing bullpens, some that are coming off injuries, some that didn't pitch a ton, and some players like a Cade Townsend who just came out and threw a lot harder than he previously had done. So all of these data points I think are useful to one degree or another. But the athletic testing, the medical that gets done at the combine, and then the in-person team interviews are probably the most useful from the team's perspective.
So as far as the prep players go, do you think that if the combine, did it change anything in your eyes, seeing all these guys next to college players? Does that change where these guys slot in for you at all, or is there like a noticeable gap there in experience and skill level? How did that change your opinions?
Actually one of the benefits of the combine that you kind of just hit on there is being able to see the high school players with their college counterparts on the same field in a big league stadium, hitting with wood, seeing how the power works for some of these guys. You've got players like PJ Morlando, who's a very prominent high school player who absolutely looked the part in a big league field, had tremendous power, great batting practice session. And then you've got a guy, Canadian, who maybe a lot of people have never heard of, Nathan Flewelling. He's a big physical catcher. He had I think, tied for second hardest max exit velocity. It was Jared Jones, the big LSU slugger, and then two high school players, Chase Harlan and Nathan Flewelling. And I think that maybe can change how people view Nathan Flewelling's power upside. I mean, even prior to the combine, he was getting 70 grade power projections moving forward. But just kind of confirming that power with metrics that teams really value, I think could be super value. In terms of how I view this high school class, it really hasn't changed how I see the group as a whole with the college group, though there were a few specific players, Tyler Bell and JD Dix, high school shortstops in particular, that I came away really impressed with and maybe personally have like a more excited outlook on those players.
Yeah, so Tyler Bell's like local for us, Lincoln Way East High School in Frankfort. Pretty
Mm,
familiar with him. I think they were both on the White Sox area code team. I know Dix. I
yep.
know Dix was for sure.
Yeah,
So
I believe you're right.
yeah, that's interesting. So in your most recent mock, you have JJ Weatherholt up at 1 to Cleveland. I know that you're not just throwing stuff at the wall. So how realistic of a possibility is that? And then when do you think Cleveland actually like makes their decision?
Yeah, two really good questions. I do think that a few, like maybe a week prior, week and a half, I'd heard that Weatherholt link, and I think even in my previous mock draft, I'd kind of mentioned Weatherholt in passing when I mocked. I don't know, it was either Connor or Bazana in the previous mock, but I mentioned that Weatherholt like makes sense as a player to keep in mind. And over the last, I'd say, week leading up to this mock coming out, I had more and more steam on this Weatherholt rumor from a number of different sources. And so I was like, yeah, let's put it up there. I'm hearing it from a lot of people. Like you said, I wouldn't kind of just throw it out there. It was useful from the sense of like you can kind of work through the thought process if this is an underslot deal, maybe looking at some of the potential players that the Guardians could then overpay with their second pick at 36. In this iteration, it was Slade Caldwell, who's the number 3 high school player in the class. But yeah, I do think that Cleveland probably still has a bigger net of players they're really considering for 1. And I would not expect them to have their decision made until very, very late in the process, potentially even the day of. It wouldn't shock me if they were a team that kind of was getting all of their processes lined up. They maybe found their final players that they viewed in a similar tier, and then kind of sent out deals and said, hey, will you take this? And if someone takes a significantly cheaper deal that they view in the same tier, maybe that's as simple as it is. But I do expect it to be very late, and I expect to not have a ton of confidence until very late in the process, if we ever really do, because Cleveland has been very much keeping these things under wraps.
So one thing that I had a question of, and I generally try and ask this question most of the time: if underslot deals and overall money bonus had absolutely nothing to do with this, who are you picking overall 1-1?
Yeah, I like that question too because you just get rid of all the money games that teams play. I would probably go Charlie Condon. He's number 1 on our board. I think in the industry, he's a consensus top 2 player in the class. It's either Condon or Bazana for most teams. For me, I like Condon's power upside and defensive versatility, chance to play third base, chance to play multiple corner outfield positions. Just a little bit more than Bazana's profile. Although I do think he's a great pure hitter. I like the athleticism with him, but I just think that if you're picking 1-1, I would really want to shoot for a lot of upside. And I think with Condon, you've got a player who has performed and hit at a very high level, an exceptionally high level, really, in the SEC for 2 years. Even if it's a maybe artificially inflated offensive environment these days, he still has numbers that stack up with the very best in college baseball. His exit velocities, even if all of the exit velocities in college baseball are inflated, his stack up with the best. So I feel pretty good about him overall. I wouldn't personally put him in the same tier of like a Dylan Cruz or Wyatt Langford from a year ago. I know some people began putting him in that tier, both him and Bazana. I wouldn't go that far just because there's something unusual about like a 6'6" right-handed hitter at the top of the class. You just don't see those players very often. It's like Chris Bryant, Alec Boehm, although that's pretty good company. If he does wind up having the career that those two had, I would be pretty happy with that outcome.
Well, I think like I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but like I didn't come into the year thinking he had like the positional versatility that he might have. Like I think a lot of people kind of thought he was first base only, but if he can play third or stand in a corner outfield spot, he's way more valuable. So
yeah, I agree entirely. We do a piece each spring kind of looking at to-do lists for all of our top 30 players. I think for Condon specifically, it was show more athleticism and show defensive versatility. And he did that exceptionally well. I think scouts specifically cited like either improved athleticism or better athleticism than they expected him to have this year. I think for a lot of teams, he's a legitimate option to play third base moving forward. If that's the case, that's phenomenal. Like that offensive profile is just so much more appealing on the other side of the infield. And even if he's not a third baseman, being able to play left or right, again, just helps so much get out of that kind of first base hit over nothing profile. So I think that really has, in addition to his offensive performance, which is obviously the driving factor, I think that's an element that is very key in terms of moving him up the draft board. We had him around 13, I think, entering the year. And within like a month of the season, he was shooting up to the very top of the class. So that's definitely like a key piece to his improvement this year.
So White Sox are picking 5. just, they have 4 of the top 80 picks. They rarely have an extra selection, but they made a trade for the Mariners one. What do you think makes sense for them there? And then how much should having 4 of the first 80 influence their pick at 5, basically?
Yeah, their bonus pool is not significantly different from all these teams picking in the top 10. All the teams around them probably have extra picks in the first supplemental round. I know Cleveland does.
It's like 15
Colorado.
million, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, they've got 14.5 total bonus pool, it looks like. So I wouldn't expect it to be a huge factor in who they pick at 5. Maybe the extra pick makes them feel like they can get a little bit riskier, but I wouldn't expect the extra pick to make too much of a difference. In terms of who fits, I really think everyone in our kind of top 10, top 11 tier players makes sense. You're going to have 4 players out of that group that you're not going to have to worry about for that pick. And I really think everyone in that tier could make some sense. It's been very difficult for me, I would say, to line up this 3 to 10 order with conviction this year. It has shuffled so much for me. It changes depending on who I send the list over to different scouts. They'll have different orders. You can line the college pitchers up in different orders. You could have the first baseman higher. You could have them lower. You could have the high school players a little higher. So I really am curious how the industry is actually going to line these players up, because it's been such a challenge for me specifically. But all the players in this range, so guys just looking at 5 through 10 right now, guys like Braden Montgomery, Chase Burns, Caglianone, Nick Kurtz, Connor Griffin, Bryce Rayner. Trey Savage is probably the least likely to be a fit at 5, just because I've heard his name less frequently. But say there's a scenario where if the 2 college pitchers go in front of them, I'm sure a bat they really like will fall to 5. So he does seem to be maybe the most unlikely of this tier. But really everyone else, I think you can make a credible case for them at 5.
So then my other question then, we've kind of heard them a lot with Connor Griffin, and I don't know that means that they would do it at 5, but how much do you think you save potentially with Connor Griffin if he knows that he's going 10th or 11th otherwise?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Just looking at the pool differences, it's the slot value for 10 is 5.9. The slot value for 5 is 7.7. So if you could save $1.5 million there, maybe it's beneficial. Right. For both parties. It's hard to get too confident in those numbers, even for the JJ Weatherholt underslot. I kind of use the Henry Davis 1-1 as a bit of a template for that. But another thing that's fascinating is I've heard a lot, and I mentioned this in the topper of the mock draft, is the bonus pools have gone up by 8.7% this year. They're very high numbers. There are 3 slot values that are worth $9 million or more. There have only been 2 players ever drafted and signed for $9 million or more. That was last year with Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens. And so I just expect a lot of these teams in the first round and the top 10 as well to be looking at underslot deals. And if every team is doing that, maybe it gets trickier to have massive savings for any one player. But if they view Connor Griffin as the best player available, and Connor Griffin has the most realistic chance to slide, I imagine they'd be in a pretty decent position there, just from a money saving and strategic standpoint.
So James and I have talked at length about this, and in your most recent mock draft, you have the White Sox selecting Jack Caglianone. So we are scared to death of the first base profile.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, it's. Would you put him in the outfield? Because I know that's been suggested that he could possibly be a corner outfield guy. I just saw him at the. No chance. All right, I saw him at the College World Series just recently, and I
don't think so. I mean, he's not that good of a runner. He's a fine defender at first base. I think if you take Jack Caglianone in that spot, you're taking him for the bat. You have conviction he's going to hit. That you kind of are hoping he is a left-handed Pete Alonso, right? Yeah, he went to the same high school as Pete. He went to the same college as Pete. He has the same kind of power over hit profile as Pete. So it's a weird comp just because of the handedness and the body is very different. But in some ways, I think it's kind of an intriguing comp. And I think that you probably don't want to complicate things for Jack. Additionally, I think you immediately have him stop pitching and focus on hitting only. Because his hitting upside is significantly higher than his upside as a pitcher. He's probably a reliever if he's a pitcher only. So yeah, I think that, let him play first base and let him mash, because if you're taking him this high, you're convinced that he's either going to hit for enough power that the question marks about kind of the pure hitting ability and the approach he's just going to hit for enough power that you won't have to worry about it, or you're confident enough in his athleticism and the two-way factor and him taking a step forward, or your hitting development as an organization into kind of helping him come along a little bit more as a hitter. I don't think any of those scenarios, it really makes a ton of sense to me to put him in the outfield. Maybe he's just a better athlete and a better mover than I'm expecting him to be, but I would be surprised if he wound up like moving around left field or right field. Like Nick Kurtz is a guy that I would be more willing to think of that, the Wake Forest first baseman, because I think he's just a better mover and athlete, but he's also a better defender at first base. I think he's a plus defender there. So I also wouldn't want to move him off that position. So yeah, both those profiles are tricky because if you are drafting a first base only, they really have to mash. And like you guys mentioned, I'm sure you talked about all the players who were expected to hit and just haven't. And if you don't, you don't have much value. The Andrew Vaughns, the Spencer Torkelsons of the world.
Well, and he's obviously much different. Like he's massive and has massive left-handed power, right? And there's all the chase concerns. So like, is that fair for me to say like Andrew Vaughn and Torkelson and all these other guys? Like, I just don't, so maybe comparing him to those guys isn't fair. I just feel like at 5, like there's plenty of guys in the class to not take a first baseman.
Yeah, no, I think it is fair. Like, obviously it's true that every player is different and their individual strengths and weaknesses they have. But I think the general sentiment is that like, if you're playing first base, the bar to clear offensively is just so high. You have to be confident in that. And even with players that I was really confident in college, Jacob Berry, great example. Jacob Berry is like it's not exactly a Jack Caglione warning flag. It's like a Nick Kurtz warning to me, because when Jacob Berry was in college, he made a lot of contact. He got on base. It was great swing decisions. He hit for power. That's Nick Kurtz to me to a T. Like, he has some of the best contact skills, approach, power. And then when he got into pro ball, it kind of just all disappeared. And then like, what do you have if you don't hit on your hit and offensive evaluation? You don't have much. With Cags, maybe you could say, oh, you have the two-way factor. That gives you another fallback option that's interesting. So you have something. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see where these two would go. I think I'm probably, like me personally, not speaking about like the consensus of our list from the industry or whatever, I would also have the first baseman further down this just for those exact reasons. I'd be more willing to take a shot on a guy like Brady Montgomery or one of the pitchers or even the high school profiles, just because there are more avenues to being a valuable player, I think.
Yeah, so, the prep pitching class seems pretty strong. Just something I found interesting. Like, do you think teams who wouldn't typically like take high school pitching might consider going that route because of the depth of this class, and that's just where the talent is essentially?
I really hope they do. I think that you're right that the depth specifically of the high school pitching, maybe in the like 40 to 100 range, is really compelling. You don't have the same like top end obvious stud at the very top, like a Noble Meyer or a Jackson Jobe. You don't have either of those. William Schmidt and Cam Caminiti are two solid high school pitching prospects, but I think both of them have more flaws than maybe a typical top of the class high school pitcher. But in terms of depth, really throughout our top 100, there are all sorts of high school arms that have size or stuff or can spin the ball or have advanced secondaries or have taken strides forward this year. I really like when teams take shots on high school pitching. It takes a long time for that profile to kind of pan out. There's a lot of risk associated with it. But like a year or two ago, if you looked at all of our top pitching prospects in baseball, most of those guys were from the high school demographic. So I just think there's a lot of upside to be had here. If you have confidence in your pitching development, you should be willing to take a shot on those guys, especially in a draft class where there maybe are less appealing hitting profiles. There may be more question marks with the college pitching demographic, whether that's performance-based or just control and command questions from these college pitchers. There are a lot of reliever profiles in the college pitching ranks. And yeah, you might get a lot of just busts if you go with high school pitching, but you can also get aces that way. And I really hope teams are more willing to invest in that demographic, because if they're not, there's not a lot of other really exciting options to put your money this year. So it'll be interesting to see how teams do it. So I hope that's the case.
So Ryan Sloan and Tyler Bell are local guys here. Do you have any projections where they might end up?
Yeah, so I had Ryan Sloan 25 to the Padres in that most recent mock draft, which I think could make sense for Sloan, both on talent and just in the range of the draft. And also just given how the Padres have operated, they are one of these teams that are not hesitant to take a high school pitching profile. I think going back to 2017, they've taken high schoolers with their first pick every single draft since that year. And that was the Mackenzie Gore draft, which again, like Mackenzie Gore is a better pitching prospect than any of the guys we're talking about here, but he looks pretty dang good right now. Took a long time to happen, but it panned out. But Ryan Sloan has had a tremendous spring. I really liked him last summer. I thought he showed 3 pitches that had a chance to be above average. Now you're maybe looking at, I don't know if I would want to go plus on the changeup this yet, but certainly the fastball and slider look like they could be plus pitches. He's been up to 100. He's big and physical. I think he does have advanced feel for that changeup, but it's just hard to put a plus grade on a high school pitcher at this stage. So I expect him at this point to either go in the back of the first round or be a first round equivalent kind of overslot in the supplemental or in the second. I mean, it even could be like a Brock Porter or a Bubba Chandler sort of deal where they're in the 3rd or 4th round, but just get paid, can measure it with their talent. So it's tricky to kind of place the high school pitchers on the board, but I would be surprised if he didn't get first round money or very close to it at this point, just given how good he's been. Tyler Bell, I would probably put in more like a top 3 round range if he's signable. Like I said, I was really impressed with him at the Combine. He looked a lot better defensively than I expected. He looked a lot better with a wood bat in his hands and with pop than I expected. So I was very intrigued by that profile. We've had him in a fairly, well, he's been an up arrow guy for us this spring, so he hasn't been in the same range, but we've got him right around like top 100 on the board at this stage. So that would be like around top 3, top 4 rounds. He is a Kentucky commit. They had a pretty good season. I'm not sure how locked into that commitment he is, but yeah, I think it wouldn't be surprising at all if he went in the 3rd round.
A couple $1 million might change that.
Exactly.
Well, because I think Ritter went to Kentucky too, right? He was a Lincoln Way East kid too. They have like a Kentucky
little pipeline there.
Yeah, I guess so. Ian, do you want to make your LA Angels joke? We have time, so.
Oh, sure. Why not? So who from the class makes the most immediate impact and who gets to the majors first? Why will it absolutely be a Los Angeles Angels player?
Yeah, the Angels seem to just be taking guys that can try and shove to the majors, right? Whoever they take is going to be a good bet unless they kind of buck their trend and take a high school player. Probably don't bet on it in that case. For me, the most like pro-ready players I would look towards, like both of the pitchers, Chase Burns and Hagen Smith, I think they have stuff to be successful in a big league pen now. So depending on kind of what org takes them, what the competitive window is, they can move quickly in a reliever role, even though I don't know if that's super popular to do for your starting pitchers. Garrett Crochet is kind of a bit of an outlier there. In terms of hitters, I think the trio of Travis Bazzana, JJ Weatherholt, and Nick Kurtz kind of have the complete offensive profile that doesn't have any holes that I'm fond of. I mean, honestly, whoever the Guardians or the Reds take, like the fact that it's draft lottery, they're 1-2, they're in a better competitive window than most teams picking 1-1. They might be decent picks, but I'll probably go, if I have to say one player, I think Nick Kurtz maybe is the best. I think he's a very well-rounded hitter. The fact that he plays first base means there's a pretty low bar for him defensively. He's already quite good at the position. He's probably going to be drafted in a range where he's at a team that's a little bit more competitive. If he winds up going to like the Nationals, maybe he gets pushed quicker with this like Dylan Cruz, James Wood tier of players. Like I could see that happening. But in terms of like just advanced professional hitting approach, I think Nick Kurtz has that. But again, that's that first base profile we all love. So who knows?
Yeah, so we obviously hate this as White Sox fans. It happened to the Nationals this year, right? But so just like the rule for obviously the big market clubs, like the White Sox are by far the worst team in baseball. They're going to pick 10th next year. They do get the first pick in every other round. So it's, it's not totally, they can get a good player at 10. But, what do you think about this rule?
So yeah, the rule is if you're a revenue paying team, you cannot pick back-to-back in the lottery. And if you're a revenue receiving team, you cannot pick 3 consecutive years in the lottery. I think it's a fantastic rule. I wish it did not matter whether you're a revenue payer or receiver. I wish it was either you can't pick back-to-back no matter what, or you can't be in 3 straight no matter what. I think the poor teams in baseball love to cry poor and get these rules implemented. But I think in terms of disincentivizing tanking, it's a phenomenal rule. I don't think it's good for baseball that teams like the Orioles can intentionally try to be bad and benefit by picking at the top of the draft. Like I've said this a million times, credit to the Orioles for identifying the right players. They had some layups like Adley Rutschman. They had some other picks like Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser, who were non-obvious picks that they did an excellent job with. But I just don't think it's good for those teams' fans to have to endure a bunch of crappy seasons just because strategically it makes sense for you to intentionally be bad. I don't think that's good for the sport. And so if this rule helps incentivize teams to try to be good at the major league level and invest in your team and not be picking this low because you're not going to get a benefit by like getting a very top pick and the bonus pool money, I think that's great. We'll see how that pans out. It's still pretty early days, but I kind of love it. I love the chaos of the draft lottery. I love how it enrages teams. I love the fact that we get a team like Cleveland picking one. I just think it's more fun. And I think the tanking disincentivization, I think, is very smart and good for the game. I would agree with you if you wanted to say, oh, why did the White Sox only get 1 year in the lottery and the A's get 2? I don't think there should be a difference based on the A's just being a cheaper ball club. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, so you just everybody's 2 years or something like that.
Yeah, it can be 2, it can be 1, whatever you want it to be. It should be the same for me.
Yeah, we talked to Jim Callis a couple of months ago, and the thing he said that he doesn't like is that the White Sox were if it held strong, they would have picked 4th. So they technically moved down a spot, and this still happens, and it happened to Oakland twice too. Like they're picking 5th and 6th or whatever they were, and then so he doesn't like that part of it. But you know, I don't really know how you change that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless, whenever you implement a system like this, there are going to be people who just like it's a lottery. Like someone is going to be lucky and someone's going to be unlucky. It's just kind of what you're throwing into the mix when you go to a lottery system. I think pick trading would maybe be more interesting as well. If we could throw that in, maybe that would help teams get some of this flexibility. Yeah, I'm not too bent out of shape about I mean, it probably would have been better for the White Sox to just miss the lottery entirely this year. Pick 7.
Oh yeah, picking 7 would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then next year you get maybe Ethan Holiday 1-1 next year. Like that's probably much more exciting for White Sox fans. I think we talked about that prior to it, but for me, I just think I'm tired of the poor teams crying poor in general. So I wish it was just whatever the rule is, it's the same for all 30 teams. And I think it would be a lot harder for people to get upset about that. Because, I mean, do you guys like outside of obviously the White Sox are getting screwed by this now, do you think disincentivizing tanking is good, or do you think that I'm overstating it?
No, I think it's good. I think the lottery is cool too. The issue I have, I mean, we could go on for hours. The draft should have happened already. I hate the July draft, but that's just a different.
You and everyone who is in baseball.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I don't like it. So last one I have for you. Just have you thought much about since rookie ball is ending, the way this is different this year? Is it going to influence will it influence how teams draft or where they send guys? I mean, because high school guys, I feel are just going to be hanging out at the complex for the rest of the season, essentially. And some of your college picks might go to low A. I'm just curious to see what happens with no rookie ball, basically.
Yeah, it does seem like teams have kind of changed how they're assigning players after the draft. I mean, for pitchers especially, it can get really tricky to have guys who've been shut down for a few months and then ramp them up just for an inning or two at a complex. I mean, there have been some teams, I think Cleveland is actually a team that last year didn't activate anyone. And so teams have had to get creative with kind of their fall instructional leagues. So it is odd. I don't think it's the most streamlined and optimized minor league system for young players, both from a timeline perspective and the fact that the levels don't seem to be as smooth as they previously were. You can easily push a player too far and have him be overmatched, and the level below maybe is not challenging enough. So it's been very weird to see how teams have gotten used to the system. So maybe it'll just be a case where more teams are having unofficial camps where they're just doing a lot of instruction. But for a lot of these teams, I mean, because this draft is so late, I think you could probably get away with not activating guys until they're ready for their first full pro season next year. But I don't know, you got guys just sitting around for a long time then. So how teams figure that out will be interesting. I don't know that I have a great solution for that, but it has been odd to see.
Well, I know scouting directors wanted it because they just, or farm directors, because they just run out of pitching, in Arizona and Florida, basically. So they're fine with this. But when you draft a Connor Griffin, Like there's nowhere for him to go because you don't want to send that guy to low A. You just he just hangs out at your facility or whatever. So
yeah, I also don't. I'm always really wondering like how teams think about like for a lot of these college pitchers they're drafting, they might be throwing like 70 or 80 innings and have thrown more innings than they ever have in a year. And that like ramp back up period is always kind of dicey for me. Like the high school pitchers, same thing. A lot of these guys are just coming off like the biggest workload season, year and a half plus of their careers. Like, and now they're kind of just like innings fodder because you need to get through your complex league games. It's just very odd to me. So yeah, it's tough. And the organizational restrictions on like players, like how many players you can actually have, that can't help. And then this year it seems like everyone is injured too. So I do not envy the farm directors, their challenge of getting games done and also prioritizing development for each player.
Yeah, also losing that additional rookie league later on in the year, same thing. It's just kind of, I don't know. It seems to me that it's kind of stunting some of the younger guys, and obviously it takes away numerous guys getting drafted as well.
Yep. Yeah, I think you nailed it there. There are fewer places to put your like deep projection players, your guys who need a lot of time at the lower levels. Like there's almost like you're incentivized to get players who move quickly because if they don't, they're just taking up other spots for your international players. It's only 20 rounds now, so you just have less options to take those types. So it's probably good for the college game. If you're a college fan, you'd like that. You get better athletes and more exciting players that make it to college just because they're not getting picked. But yeah, it is tricky if you're an area scout or you're just like one of these deeper project type players who doesn't really have an interest in college and wants to go pro.
Yeah, it also makes the Rule 5 draft a little bit more interesting as well because there's just not enough roster spots for a bunch of these guys,
Yeah, so, definitely.
James, are you good? All right. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for your time. Do you want to let the people know where they can find you and your work?
Yeah, you can just follow me at Baseball America. That's where all my work will go. I'd encourage you guys to just check out the site. We've got updated draft rankings, updated reports, more mock drafts coming, in-season top 30s. We're about to update our mid-season top 30s for that on the site shortly. So just a ton of content coming. Draft season is always very busy for us, and we're very close now. It feels crazy, but like you said, James, this later draft date kind of does kill us. We've got already stuff going on for next year's class, and we haven't even had our 2024 draft. So it's busy season, but yeah, you can find me at Baseball America.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.